This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Tito's Handmade Vodka is America's favorite vodka for a reason. From the first legal distillery in Texas, Tito's is 6 times distilled till it's just right. And naturally gluten-free, making it a high-quality spirit that mixes with just about anything. From the smoothest martinis to the best Bloody Marys. Tito's is known for giving back, teaming up with nonprofits to serve its communities and do good for dogs. Make your next cocktail with Tito's. Distilled and bottled by 5th Generation Inc., Austin, Texas. 40% alcohol by volume. Savor responsibly.
I might have been, a quote, throwback, but I didn't see myself as a throwback. I saw myself as modern and forward-looking.
Welcome to another episode of Live Through That. I'm your host, Mike Hipple, and on this podcast, we dig a little deeper into the pivotal moments that shaped the lives of some of my favorite artists from the 80s and 90s. This week, we're bringing you a special bonus episode with more from our conversation with Suzanne Vega. One of the things that we dug into was the early days of her career, how she broke into the music world, and landed her deal with A&M Records. So let's start where every good story does, at the beginning.
I'll tell you, because it really is interesting. I had the great good fortune of meeting Ron Fierstein in 1982. And he was a terrific manager, and he was my manager for, I think, 18 years total. And he was a great manager, and it was the first time he had ever managed anyone. Steve Adalbo, I think I was the first time he'd produced anyone, and I was basically a receptionist at that point at a typesetting company. So the three of us kind of got together and formed this plan. It was Ron's idea to target A&M. And we had lunches. We had a lot of lunches back then, which I loved because I had no money and I didn't eat very much. And he felt I needed feeding. So he would take me out to lunch. And so we would talk about things over these lunches. And he said, how many records do you think you could sell? And I was looking at the people around me and I thought, oh, probably 100,000. At that point, George Thorogood had sold 100,000 on, I think it was Rounder Records. So that seemed like the high end, or there was Flying Fish, Rounder Records, people like that. And 100K seemed like, wow, that seemed like a million. So I told him that's what I thought I could do. And he said he thought I could do better than that. And I was like, okay. And he said, I think I could get you a major label deal. So I was like, I never even thought about it in terms of major label, minor label, indies, then none of that meant anything to me. A record deal was a record deal. So I said, okay. And he said, I think A&M is the record label for you. And I'll tell you why, because it's an artist label, because it was started by Jerry Moss and Herb Alpert. And they have great artists on their label. They have artists like, he was a big Cat Stevens fan. He was a big Joan Armatrading fan. Joe Jackson. So he felt that they were the smallest of the big labels and that I could have a home there. He felt that I was an artist and that I was uncompromising, and he would continue that. He would continue to promote me as someone who was not going to change my image or anything. He wanted to just put me up there as I actually existed. All of that sounded great. I was like, yeah, when do we start? And we started immediately. So we signed this little deal. The way he put it was, we'll work on this demo tape for you. And if it's not, if it's signed, then you get a record deal. If it's not signed, then you end up with this demo tape. So you're good either way. So I just thought, yeah, let's do it. So then there's more to it later. Then there's 2 years of making demo tapes, being rejected by everybody, including A&M. But he still had that target vision. It was like, okay, we've been turned down by A&M, but you know what? Let's do a different demo tape. And I kept singing, and my reviews were getting better and better. And finally, bing, we had A&M's attention. They still didn't like the demos. They wanted to give us a development deal. They'd give us $5,000 to do a demo tape that they could put their influence in, their influence being Lenny Kaye. So it was Nancy Jeffries who said, "We'll give her $5,000, but we need someone to join Steve Adabo." So that's how the first team got started. And then I got the New York Times review from Stephen Holden that said a lot of things. And the next day, Geffen called Ron Fierstein saying, "How come you didn't contact us?" And Ron said, "We did contact you. Here's your rejection letter." So then there was a bidding war, and we went with A&M, who we had always wanted to be with anyway.
A&M released her self-titled debut in 1985, featuring the now classic Marlena on the Wall, quietly marking her as an artist to watch.
Yes, I remember. In fact, I'll never forget the week it came out. I knew somehow I'd gotten the idea that A&M expected to sell 30,000 copies of the first record. I thought, okay, for a person whose sky was 100K, I was like 30K. No. So when I found out that the first album had sold 17,000 copies that first week, I remember thinking, what? Like, who are these people? Like, I don't even know 17,000 people. So, it was like somehow, I was thinking the Fernald Folk Festival. That's where I used to play. I had played on the Columbia campus. But I thought somehow, I couldn't even keep all those people in my mind's eye, 17,000. And I saw the numbers creep up every week because in those days you would sell a bunch in the beginning and then maybe you would sell more, and then you would go up in the charts. So there was some action there in the US charts, but there was more of it in the UK. In the UK, I actually had like hits. I had Marlena on the Wall, got me on the Top of the Pops, and some other shows, and some of the other, I can't even remember now. I think I did Cracking, Small Blue Thing. So I think my intention, was not to be some sort of 70s hippie chick girl. Um, I was, I liked the look. I liked the look of Patti Smith, and a lot of the new wave women like Chrissy Hind, Pat Benatar, they all wore jackets. They wore black jackets. So I liked the black jacket thing because it also meant like I didn't have to reveal my body or be, I just thought that was something I didn't want to do. And I'd cut my hair. So there was the look. And then there was the music, which my only instrument is the acoustic guitar. But I felt it was really a modern thing to do to blend the acoustic guitar with storytelling, well, with the usual folk sort of songs like Gypsy and Queen and the Soldier, but also to use synthesizers, which were kind of new at the time. So instead of having a bass player at first, we had Steve Adabo on synth, and then we had John Gordon on guitar, and that was it. It was the three of us, making a racket on the Folk City stage. So it felt modern. I might have been, a quote throwback, but I didn't see myself as a throwback. I saw myself as modern and forward looking.
99.9 degrees Fahrenheit marked a bit of a stylistic difference for Suzanne, and I was wondering how that whole thing came to be.
It was a question of freedom. Ron Fierstein and Steve Adabo. See, I was starting to run for management and Ron and Steve for production. So at some point I rebelled a little bit and I was like, why do we always have to work with Steve with production? Most artists are free to do whatever they want and I want to do whatever I want. So Ron said, fine, do it yourself. So we were like, oh, okay. So me and Anton Sanko had produced Days of Open Hand, which was difficult. It took a whole year and we were very anxious. So I said, no, I said for 99.9, I want to bring in somebody to help me produce, someone who's produced before, someone who knows what they're doing. So I hired Mitchell Froome because I liked his work with Crowded House. And clearly, the work I did with Mitchell Froom was not like anything either of us had done before. It's not like I decided, oh, I'm going to go all industrial and get really weird. It wasn't like that at all. I thought he was going to give me like good pop productions that, would be fun. The first thing we worked on was Blood Makes Noise. Mitchell set up these conditions by which it was just the two of us working together in one room. No record company, no other musicians, no hangers on, no visitors, no family, nothing. Me and him in a room with musical ideas going back and forth. So we were after a kind of freedom. And somehow Blood Makes Noise ended up on the agenda like first thing. And I said, I have the song. I sang the lyrics to him in the air. He said, okay, that's interesting. I left him with some instructions. I said, I want this to sound like the Ramones. I hear it as a fast, edgy, nervous, guitar-driven song. So he said, sure. And then I went home and I came in the next day and he'd taken my ideas basically and thrown them out the window. And he'd come up with that anvil sound and the drum loop and and that bass line. And my lyrics fit perfectly over this crazy production, which sounded cool and funny and kind of soulful. My mind was blown. I was like, oh my God, this is so great. I can't stop screaming. Um, and that was the first thing we did working together. So, and then from then on, we were conspirators because we were like, this is awesome. We can do what we want. It's like, so we got very excited by this whole direction. And it was a very dynamic relationship. And we had the whole album mapped out in 2 weeks. I mean, it's very fast and very, very vibrant connection we had, obviously. Since then, we had a child and got married. So that's how that happened. That's how it felt to me. And when people were like, oh, are you doing industrial folk now? Or you've been listening to Trent Reznor? I was like, who's Trent Reznor? And so then I got into Trent Reznor, and then I still am a Trent Reznor fan. And we listened to him, for example, for the last album I did called Flying with Angels. He was sort of a reference. He and his partner, current partner, were a reference for a couple of songs that I worked on with Jerry Leonard. So eventually I discovered industrial music, but at the moment it was just how do you get the inner landscape to be outer, to come out, to be actually manifest. So that was the urgent issue of the moment with Mitchell.
And did the fans react negatively to this new direction?
Oh boy. Not from the American side. I was so happy that I walked in. Who was the president then? By the time I worked on 99.9, I had been part of A&M for 8 years. So we had a few changeovers of the president. I think in 1990, the president became Gil Friesen, and then in 92, it was Al Cafaro. So the wonderful thing about having all that success so soon after I got signed to A&M was that I had carte blanche all over the lot. I could walk into anybody's office one-on-one and just say, hi, how you doing? So I remember walking into Al Cafaro's office and saying, what do you think about this? My contract with Ron Fierstein, interesting to note, was that I was signed to him for production and he was signed to A&M. So that meant they had no say in what we did. That meant I had total artistic control, which is very different than most people are signed to the record label directly. So they would have to take what we gave them with no questions asked. But I was curious to know. So I did the album with Mitchell Froom and we handed it in. And then I went running into Al Cafaro to say, what do you think? And he said he thought it was great. He said he thought it was entertaining and still artistically, what was the word? Like on the cutting edge. He totally got it and he was totally behind it. And I felt that I'd worked with the guy who was in charge of marketing, Jim Guerno, who loved it. And he, in fact, wanted to take I think he's probably the one who marketed Blood Makes Noise to the alternative radio, and it ended up being a number one alternative hit. So it worked great in America. Europe, not so much. I remember going to Europe and playing it for the record company and just feeling the air getting colder and colder. I felt the sweat on the back of my neck as we went through the whole album, and people were kind of angry. They were, and a lot of, not just the record company who were like, okay, well, if you keep giving us this, we're going to have to work with it. But, they were like, why would you do that? Why wouldn't you do what you did before? You're the folky girl. Why are you putting all this noise in here? And some of the journalists were not kind, or some of the radio people were resistant to it at first. Eventually, people got used to it, and it stopped becoming an issue. But they were much less tolerant. Oh God, retirement. I'd like to think no, that I'm not heading towards retirement. The reason I took so long with this last album is because I had, as an artist and as someone who studied many different disciplines as a child and as a teenager, my original plan was to be a dancer. I studied dance from the time I was 9 years old. I had also done sculpture when I was 12. I started writing songs when I was 14. I'd studied acting in college. I minored in theater. So, from time to time, I feel like I need to go wander down these other paths. So I'd spent pretty much 10 years occupied with the world of the theater, working on my one-woman play about Carson McCullers, the writer. So that took up a lot of time. And then there was, from time to time, just personally, things go and spin into chaos. So it's hard to sit down and write songs during those periods, or business-wise, something will happen. So that's why it took 10 years. Just as I had figured, in 2019, I had made a film of the play, and I thought, okay, that's done. Let's write some songs. And then we walked into COVID, which I felt so much anxiety. I just took notes night and day. And a lot of those notes are now on the Flying with Angels album. So no, I hope to keep writing as long as I have my stamina and my health, and as long as I'm, can rise above all the craziness of the later years of life. I'd like to keep doing it as long as I can.
Suzanne's new record, Flying with Angels, is out now and available wherever you get your music. She's on tour in Europe at the moment and will bring her show stateside this spring. You can check out her website for tickets, and I'll post that in the show notes. And again, many thanks to Suzanne for such a fantastic chat. And as always, a quick reminder that you can buy my book on 80s musicians and where they are today, 80s Redux, and its sequel, Live Through That, on 90s artists, wherever you buy your books. And if you like this show, please leave a review where you're listening. It really helps others find us. And of course, please subscribe so that you won't ever miss an episode. Thanks for listening.